In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King begins a working visit to the Vatican for talks with Pope Francis on bilateral and regional issues. The King and the Palestinian President hold talks on efforts to bring about peace and achieve the two-state solution. And Damascus residents stock up on supplies as U.S. officials describe plans for strikes on Syria that could last for days. Good evening and welcome to the news at 10. Their Majesties King Abdullah and Queen Rania left for the Vatican on a working visit. The King will hold talks with Pope Francis on ways of cementing ties between Jordan and the Vatican and issues related to boosting Muslim-Christian cooperation, dialogue and coexistence. King Abdullah and the head of the Catholic Church will also discuss developments in the Middle East and other issues of common interest. His Royal Highness Prince Faisal bin Hussein was sworn in as regent before the cabinet. Earlier, His Majesty the King and Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas held talks on resumed Palestinian-Israeli peace talks to achieve the two-state solution. The King told Abbas, who updated him on the peace talks, which resumed recently, that Jordan backed the Palestinians' aspirations for setting up an independent state on 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. Palestinian statehood, His Majesty reiterated, is a national Jordanian interest, noting that the Arab Peace Initiative is a historic opportunity to achieve comprehensive peace. King Abdullah hailed U.S. efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East, but warned Israel that its unilateral action in Jerusalem and the ongoing settlement expansion would undermine such endeavors. His Majesty stressed close consultation between Jordan and the Palestinians in all stages of the negotiating process in a way to guarantee the safeguarding Jordanian interests. The King and Abbas also discussed the situation in the region, including the Syrian crisis, and the two leaders agreed that a comprehensive solution should be found to end the suffering of the Syrian people. Abbas said Jordan is a true partner and that further meeting on the peace talks would be held in the future.
Jordan is our partner in more than just the nationalistic sense. There are issues that concern it specifically, such as borders, water, refugees, Jerusalem, security, and otherwise. So to us, Jordan is our full partner, and we must hold discussions together before and after the peace talks. That was the main focus of our meeting, and we also spoke of the general state of the Arab nations and the dangerous escalation taking place.
Some 880,000 voters, or 37.3% of the electorate, have cast ballots in yesterday's municipal elections nationwide. According to final statistics, Amman had the lowest turnout with just 10.4% of registered voters casting ballots. Authorities said polling went smoothly and was generally trouble-free, thanking election officials and security forces for their roles in the kingdom's second election held in a single year. Hibatum filed this report.
The government labeled the municipal elections a success despite a low turnout. Officials said the overall number of the voters across the kingdom reached around 880,000 out of the 2,357,000 registered for the polls, or approximately 37.3%. Voter apathy was noticeable in Amman, where only 10.5% of eligible voters participated in the polls. The announcement was made at a joint press conference held by Minister of Municipal Affairs Walid al-Masri and Interior Minister Hussein al-Majali. However, the officials said pre-election reports showed that the voting rate would not exceed 6 to 7% in Amman and 15% in the rest of the kingdom. They highlighted that the results were better than the forecasts. Majali said that in Amman, 139,000 citizens had cast their votes out of the 1,035,000 registered voters. Acknowledging that several technical flaws occurred during the voting process, Masri stressed that they had no impact on the overall election process, adding that the authorities are launching an investigation after a group of people stole 2 ballot boxes and damaged other boxes in election center in Karak.
النجاح بإعادة الثقة للانتخابات.
Success lies in restoring public confidence in the elections, according to the international criteria. Success or failure of any election lies in their credibility and by not rigging them, and that the results match the opinion and the will of voters. I think that has been fulfilled. There is nothing to point that the elections were not free or fair, or that the Jordanian state was not neutral toward the polls.
The Interior Minister briefed reporters on the security situation in various parts of the country, saying apart from what happened in Karak, the overall process was secure and no major incidents were reported. Majali said these figures and statistics are not frustrating, rather they are normal and do not reflect the impact of any sort of boycott. According to the Municipal Affairs Ministry, the lowest turnout was registered in the Greater Amman municipality districts. The highest voter turnout was recorded in Aqaba, with almost 63% casting their votes out of the 17,752 registered voters. Hiba Al-Atoum for the News at 10.
Jordan reiterated it will not be a launchpad for any military action against Syria and said a political solution should be found to safeguard the country's unity. Minister of State for Media Affairs and Official Government spokesman Mohammed Momani said Jordan's firm's position stems from its higher national interest and non-intervention in its neighbors' affairs. Momani said Jordanian military and security forces are capable of protecting the kingdom's security and stability, noting that the armed forces had displayed readiness and managed to thwart many attempts to smuggle weapons across the kingdom's borders. Jordan, he said, bore the brunt of the Syrian crisis that posed huge security and economic burdens to the kingdom. Residents of the Syrian capital Damascus stocked up on supplies and some left homes close to potential targets as U.S. officials describe plans for multinational strikes on Syria that could last for days. UN Chief Ban Ki-moon appealed for unity among world powers and sought more time for UN inspectors to complete their work. But Washington and its European allies say their minds are made up and the Syrian regime must face retribution for using banned weapons against their people. Faraj Looney has the story.
The United Nations Security Council is set for a showdown over Syria after Britain sought authorization for Western military action. But Russia said a military strike is premature. Prime Minister David Cameron said Britain would propose a resolution today at the Security Council in New York, seeking authority to take necessary measures to protect Syrian civilians. Short of a veto at the Security Council, the British move seemed part of a diplomatic strategy to isolate Moscow and rally a broad coalition behind Washington. Cameron has set out the case for a targeted military strike.
We decided unanimously that the use of chemical weapons by the Assad regime is unacceptable and that the world cannot stand by in the face of that. The Cabinet will meet tomorrow to discuss the United Kingdom's response, and of course, as you know, the Prime Minister will present the government's case to Parliament tomorrow as well. In parallel with that, in New York, we have called together a meeting of the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council.
In Damascus, UN inspectors paid a second visit to the chemical weapons attack site. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon pleaded for the inspectors to be given the time they need to complete their mission. Ban said in a speech at The Hague that the inspectors need 4 days to conclude their investigation and time to analyze the findings. He said the Council must at last find a unity to act and it must use its authority for peace.
I would not speculate anything, which I'm not aware. But if there needs to be any such unilateral or military actions, you should remember that as a Secretary General, I would like to emphasize that It is the Charter that provides the framework for action to ensure international peace and security. Yes.
Ban's special envoy for Syria, Algerian diplomat Lakhdar Brahimi, said international law is clear in requiring council authorization for any military action.
There is enough killing that has taken place in Syria. You don't want more killing. You want this killing to end. So I am against military interventions by principle. But what will happen, we'll see what will happen. Who has the right to punish Bashar al-Assad or anybody else and hasn't the right to do that? All these questions, I'm sure you will be discussing them in your newspapers and television stations indefinitely.
Washington and NATO said evidence indicates that President Bashar al-Assad's forces were responsible for the use of chemical weapons.
NATO allies expressed their full support to the ongoing United Nations investigation. They deplored that the Syrian regime failed to provide immediate and secure access for the United Nations inspectors to the sites of the attacks.
However, Syrian Deputy Foreign Minister Faisal Miqdad said the United States, Britain and France helped what he called terrorists to use chemical weapons, and that the same groups would soon use them against Europe. Miqdad told reporters he had presented UN chemical weapons inspectors with evidence that armed groups had used sarin gas in all sites of alleged attacks. Iran's Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said military action against Syria will have consequences reaching beyond the border of Syria and would set the entire region ablaze. The United States, Europe and Middle East allies have already pinned the blame on President Bashar al-Assad's forces. Even if Russia lacks UN approval, US-led air or missile strike on Syria look all but certain, though the timing is far from clear. Faraj Looney for the news at 10.
Amid the threats of a military strike on Syria, Turkey and Israel have put their militaries on alert. Turkish Foreign Minister Ahmet Davutoglu said the Turkish armed forces have the mandate to take every measure against any security threat from Syria or elsewhere and retaliate within the rules of engagement. Israel was deploying all of its missile defenses as a precaution against possible Syrian retaliatory attacks should Western powers carry out threatened strikes on Syria. But Israel Radio, which reported the buildup, did not say how many interceptor batteries were mobilized by Israel's Air Defense Corps. The missile defense include a short-range Iron Dome, the mid-range Patriot, and the long-range Arrow 2. Damascus has hinted it could shoot back at Israel. Israel is also braced for rocket salvos from Hezbollah, Syria's Lebanese militia ally. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel sought to stay out of the Syrian crisis, but would respond forcefully to any attack attempt. He struck a more calming tone today as Israelis stood in long lines at gas mask distribution centers. Amid signs of an imminent strike on Syria, Iraqi Prime Minister Nour al-Maliki said his country has put its security forces on high alert. Iraq has reinforced security along its 680-kilometer desert border with Syria, making it the most heavily guarded Iraqi frontier. The Iraqi government says Syria's civil war is fueling attacks in Iraq by al-Qaeda-linked groups who have been operating on both sides of the frontier. The Baghdad government is struggling with its own insurgency, and sectarian tensions have risen since the start of the uprising in Syria. In the latest violence, multiple attacks have left dozens dead across Iraq. We get more in this report.
The sound of broken glass being swept from the road signals another deadly blast. Another chapter in the worst wave of violence in Iraq in 5 years. The blood-soaked pavement and shattered shopfront, now familiar sights, after a car exploded, killing 7 and wounding 16, according to police, in the Shiite district of Sadr city, northeast of the Iraqi capital. In the Al-Shab district, another northeastern suburb of Baghdad, a bulldozer sets about clearing up after at least 8 people were killed and 32 injured when 2 car bombs exploded in quick succession. One man described what he saw.
I saw the blast and the aftermath. Many people were hurt and shops were damaged. What did they do to deserve this? All of them have families to look after.
These blasts were among a series of attacks across Baghdad on Wednesday, killing scores and wounding dozens more. More than 1,000 Iraqis were killed in July, the highest monthly death toll since 2008, according to the United Nations. Iraqis have suffered extreme violence for years, but since the start of the year, the targeting of civilians has dramatically increased.
At least 26 people were killed in a series of bombings across Afghanistan. A bomb attack on a base operated by Polish and Afghan forces in the eastern Afghan province of Ghazni left 6 people dead. Elsewhere, 2 attacks in Helmand province killed 3 soldiers, 10 civilians, and wounded more than 20 other people. In one of the attacks in Helmand, a suicide bomber blew himself up near a foreign troop convoy, but without killing or wounding any of the soldiers targeted. In the second attack, a suicide bomber in a car killed 3 soldiers. Every year on the last Wednesday of August, thousands of Spaniards turn up to throw tons of ripe tomatoes at each other in the street fight known as Tomatina. Around 20,000 people participated in the festival, including many tourists who for the first time had to pay a minimum of €10 fee to take part in the hour-long event. Participants jumped and fell into the sea of red mush as they pelted each other with tomatoes, which were distributed to the crowds from loaded trucks.
Recuerden que vais en 5 camiones como estos. Mira, mira.
Top seed Novak Djokovic lived up to his ranking by playing to near perfection, overwhelming Lithuanian Rikardas Bernakis 6-1, 6-2, 6-2 in his opening match at the US Open in New York. The world #1 committed only 2 unforced errors before getting a little sloppy towards the end of the third set, finishing with 9 miscues against 28 winners, including 10 aces. Djokovic, the reigning Australian Open champion and runner-up at Wimbledon, will play Germany's Benjamin Becker in the second round. Racers set out on the first stage of the Tour of Rio cycling competition in Brazil. Over 100 racers from both Brazilian and international cycling teams are competing in the 5-stage, 800-kilometer competition. The courses for the different stages will take riders past some of Brazil's most incredible coastal scenery, starting with Rio de Janeiro's beach suburb, Barra del Tijuca, and ending on Sunday when they cross the finish line in Quinta da Boa Vista. Finally, a quick look at the weather. Normal summer conditions are expected over the next 2 days in most parts of the country, with northwesterly moderate to brisk winds, while remaining hot in the desert areas and Jordan Valley. The Gulf of Aqaba can expect a warm night and hot tomorrow, with moderate winds and calm seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. To end the news, here's a reminder of our top stories. His Majesty the King begins a working visit to the Vatican for talks with Pope Francis on bilateral and regional issues. The King and the Palestinian President hold talks on efforts to bring about peace and achieve the two-state solution. And Damascus residents stock up on supplies as U.S. officials describe plans for strikes on Syria that could last for days. With that, we come to the end of tonight's news. I'm Nancy Khair. Thank you for watching and have a good night.